開會嘅法。
So we formed a quorum as is the appointed time. So can we invite the deputations and the administration to join us, please?
OK， 差唔多啦，坐好啦，我講。好，請各位就坐下。
Oh, please be seated. This morning, we welcome the deputations and individuals joining us, and we also have the administration team attending the meeting. A total of 25 deputations and individuals have enrolled for the meeting. Most of you are here already. I'd like to remind deputations and individuals, if needed, you may use our earpiece and loudspeaker. Channel 0 is floor. Channel 1 is Cantonese. Channel 2 is English. And Channel 3 is Putonghua. Deputations and individuals, you will be given 3 minutes to speak. So please make the best use of your time. And I would like to remind deputations and individuals that your speeches and written submissions will not be protected under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And also please note the security measures as outlined in the note for members of the public attending meetings in conference rooms or observing meetings in public galleries in the electoral complex. And this note has been attached to the letter sent to you by the Secretariat and has also been tabled in front of you. Those in the public galleries are welcome, and you can also ask for a copy of the notes from our security staff. Also, deputations and individuals, if you have prepared your speaking notes, Please write your name on the speaking notes, and before you leave the meeting room, please hand over your speaking notes to our staff for the panels or the subcommittee's reference. So I'll now invite you to speak one by one. The first one is Dr. Chong San, 3 minutes. Good morning. First of all, I would like to express my stance clearly. I support the regulation, the Product Eco-responsibility Regulated Electrical Equipment Regulation. I have 2 points to make about the scale or the size of the WEEE facilities. The government says that there should be a licensed recyclers to collect the old electrical appliances from the sellers so that the e-waste will not be exported. And also there is the requirement of the import and export permit. I think that is an effective measure to try to stop the problem at source. Now, if this succeeds, these measures, all these e-waste will remain in Hong Kong. The government's estimated there will be 70,000 tons of e-waste, but then for the e-waste facility, they have a capacity of some 50,000 tons only. Now, in 2009, our study was the domestic e-waste. It was over 80,000 tons, excluding the commercial e-waste. I don't know how the government arrived at its own figures, but for my study, I know exactly the figure and how the situation is like. So it can easily over 100,000 tons of e-waste, including both domestic and commercial e-waste. So can the WEEE facility handle that? Maybe we have to count on the licensed recyclers, but they work mainly on computers, as we all know. So we are worried that will that be the scenario that there will be e-waste which cannot be handled in time. So I think the government should follow up on that. Please look at whether we should expand the scale of the WEEE facility, and also not to take away its repair function, because this is also very important. Second, we have this one replacing one approach. So if I buy a new set of electric appliance, my old one can be taken away. But I don't see a clear answer to this. Say, if I have 3 TV sets, I'm not going to buy any new one. I just want to discard the two of them. So how can I discard these 2? Once the ordinance takes effect, if I remember correctly, you will also be amending the WDO. That is to say, the refuse collection stations will not be taking these e-waste freely. So are we going to buy a tag, a label? Are we going to pay for it? So that's not very clear. So I think the public should understand better on this. So that's my point. Next, we have the Hong Kong Environmental Association Limited, Mr. Yao. Good morning. I am very happy to be coming here. I just graduated, so I'm very pleased to be here. We've been working on recycling for a long time. We've been educating the public on this, and we know that the public have been very active in working on recycling, so we support the policy. We have 2 worries for your consideration. Say for an aged person, maybe he has 5 TV sets, while the kids that maybe have grown up and they want to buy a new one, but they want to. What about these 5 old ones at home? Well, the existing legislation is one new one will replace the old one. So what about how do they discard the existing 5? Our second point is about recycling levy. I understand that the supplier has to be responsible for paying the levy. Say, for example, for TV set, it's cost $165. We understand the companies have to make a profit, and they would like to pass on the cost to the consumers. And most of the companies, I believe, would not like to increase the prices, and they may be absorbing the cost on their own, and they don't want to affect consumers. That's good. Say, for example, for $165 for TV set, maybe half of them will be borne by the consumers, the other half being absorbed by the companies themselves, and that's an ideal scenario. But then for some companies, they will pass on the levy cost entirely to the consumers, who have to bear all the recycling fee. Then they have to pay more. Companies will not be paying the recycling fee, and the members of the public are asked to pay the fee in entirety. So consumers will have a heavier financial burden then. So I hope that the government and the legislature can consider this. Maybe ask the suppliers to bear part of the levy cost. Thank you. Next one is Ms. Kwok Hoi from Hong Kong Recycling Chamber of Commerce. I speak on behalf of the Commerce. We have 400 members. We affect 100,000 people in the trade. The government has consulted us on the scheme, and the members actually have not received any information on that. The government has issued the commencement notice, which will take effect on the 19th of June. So if the notice takes effect, the livelihood of the relevant industries, including the logistic industries, will be affected. And I don't think there will be any e-waste will be dumped onto the landfill. We are levying a much lesser fee than ALBA IWS, so we should not be agreeing to this 15% of the e-waste being dumped to the landfill. The EPD said that they have communicated with us on this e-waste proposal, but in effect, they just told us that we have to be getting a license before we can continue operation. But we're not clear about the licensing requirements. In March, the members of the chamber have asked for the specific requirements for licensing. The reply given us is that the law has not come into effect, so no information can be given. And they even don't answer whether the e-waste will be considered as chemical waste. But then, in fact, in February, the ALBA IWS has made an announcement on how the policy will work and how the labeling system will work. But the EPD hasn't given us the similar information, so unfair competition is created. In fact, if the government would like to enhance environmental protection, our chamber will support it. But then for the new policy, under the new policy, only industrial land use can be used for recycling. But I don't think that's feasible because we don't have enough land. And if we are not using industrial land, no import and export license will be issued, and our livelihood will be affected. There will be grave consequences. And 3 months are needed for the approval process. It's too long. And also, the licensing fee is also too high. So in order that the trade can cooperate better with the government, we have the following suggestions. We should suspend the commencement of the notice, and we should have a grace period for 3 years so that we can have sufficient time to talk to the EPD to map out the details. And the media have been smearing the trade, saying that we are operating illegally. So in order to clear our name, I will invite you to visit our operation yards. And also the government should cut down on the licensing fee. And, well, your time's up, sorry. The next one. Mr. Lau Yong-pyo from Environmental and Technologies and Engineering Service. All along, people have misunderstanding on the recycling trade, and they often associate our industry with pollution and refuse. So I'm going to give you more information. Take U.S. as an example. Recycling is the third largest industry after pharmaceuticals and automobiles. According to their study, 2015, they have provided 470,000 jobs, and they have paid a tax of $11.2 billion US. But in the EPD's consultation document, the EPD has not really understood thoroughly how the recycling trade works worldwide. The Baptist University has organized a delegation overseas, but the EBD officials going on the trip only understood how large the industry is after the visit. And our scale is not less than that in Korea. And e-waste is just part of the recycling industry. And we don't see the government has considered thoroughly the aspects of the technical side and public education before mapping out the policy. And they haven't taken reference from overseas practices, and they haven't tried to understand how the recycling trade has operated in the past decades. They have blindly launched the policies to clamp down on our industry.
In the past decade or so, Hong Kong has such a good system. It's no worse than that of Korea. The legislation will only damage our recycling business. It is damaging recycling business in the name of protecting the environment. There should be a better understanding of recycling. Now, in the CEC in Wan Chai, there is an international recycling conference, the BIR. Every year they organize the conference in different cities, and this time in Hong Kong. This is the result of the good efforts of the recycling business. This is to tell the world the recycling industry in Hong Kong has been very successful and has reached international standard. The government needs to conduct a public consultation anew, so that the public knows what is going on in recycling in the world. The government should also defer the implementation of the new law for 3 years. In the interim, it should review the law that affects people's livelihood. I urge all the green groups to work together and try to assist the recycling industry to make good use of resources, to avoid waste and overly exploiting the industry, Earth's resources. Mr. McTravis, the Alba IWS.
Statement to make at this time, but I'm happy to be here to assist with any questions that members may have regarding our contract with the government.
到下一位
Next, Mr. Ho of the Chengyun Logistics. Chairman, with regard to the promotion of recycling and proper disposal of electrical equipment and electronic equipment amendment ordinance, I have the following view. The law the administration has not fully consulted the recycling business in Hong Kong. In 2017, the consultation only contacted a few dozen groups and stakeholders. According to the Productivity Council, there are 2,600 companies in the recycling business. The consultation is too small. It cannot fully reflect the views of the recycling industry. I therefore propose that there should be another consultation which should be wide enough so as to establish its credibility. Recycling industry has been developing in the world. All the countries are putting in great efforts to develop recycling industry. The recycling industry provides jobs to the grassroots. The government should attach importance to recycling industry. There should be an opportunity for sustainable development for the recycling industry. Next, Mr. Koo of the Wameitai Group. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, and also ladies and gentlemen, we have been in the WEEE business for more than 20 years. We're able to deal with logistics, the container yards, and our factories, and we contributed to recycling and reuse of resources. As for those who are engaging in recycling of WEEE, there are more than 2,600 companies. Now, after July, if there is no import of waste of WEEE, then many businesses will have to close down. A large number of families will be affected, and there will be instability in society. We also have to pay the overheads. We also have to have the machines, and they cannot be disposed of overnight. The industry will have to stop operating and wait for licensing if the law comes into effect. This will have adverse consequences. At the end of 2016, we applied for a new license for transportation of WEEE. We've been asking the EPD, and up till now no answer has been given when the license will be given. If we get the license and then we apply for a disposal license, that will be another year, and then there will be another year for the import and export license. You can see that from the EPD website. The law should be, or the notice should be deferred by 3 to 5 years as a transition, depending on the progress of licensing and vetting by the EPD. The industry can then talk to the government on the procedure for applying for license. This will avoid a serious damage to the recycling industry. Next, Mr. Yip of the Eco-Metal, Hong Kong Limited. He's not here. Next, the Chong's Logistics, Mr. Chan. Chairman, members of the Council, now we are responsible for dismantling WEEE and for transporting WEEE. We have been working for more than a decade. We have been doing business for a decade, and we have not received any demand from the EPD to get the license. Last year, we were told that we should have an import and export license. The threshold is very high. We are just doing simple dismantling. The deputy DEP and several officers visited my company, and we also participated in a tour of Korea. In fact, what Korea is doing is very similar to what we are doing here in Hong Kong. We applied for a license, but up till now, they have not given a license to our fellow recyclers. You also have not given us any export or import license. You just try to close down our business. Have you considered the adverse impacts? As for our company, considering we have 60 workers and drivers, now the number has declined to less than 30. The EPD has little understanding of the recycling industry. As for WEEE, you just regard them as waste, and they should be sent to the landfills. But after we've dismantled the WEEE, we do not send anything. We don't have anything to be sent to the landfills. These resources are very important. There is no need to damage the earth by providing more landfills. The EPD just kills the recycling industry by this new piece of legislation. Now, the logistics industry, the container industry will also be adversely affected because of this law. There are several thousand companies which will have to fold up after the law commences, and many people will be rendered jobless. I hope the officials and honorable members will try to understand our industry by paying visits to our businesses. Next is Mr. Chu of Top Pro Consulting Company. Chairman, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak on the promotion, recycling, and proper disposal, electrical equipment and electronic equipment amendment Ordinance 26 and Commencement Notice 2017. Now, the licensing scheme has caused an adverse impact on our clients because our clients are not able to obtain the import and export license and disposal license. The goods were returned to the places of origin, and we may face even face prosecution. The businesses have experienced a decline of business by 40%. Many drivers and many workers have no jobs to do. In 2014, the value added by recycling industry is $7.8 billion, an annual increase of about 9.8%. And the industry employed 1.1% of labor force. If the TDC is correct, then in 2017, value added will be $9.4 billion, not a small sum. In terms of people employed and also the value added, the recycling industry is a very important industry in Hong Kong. As at the end of 2016, the requirement of handling WEE on industrial land is too stringent because there is not enough industrial land in Hong Kong. 90% of the recyclers will have to wind up. And with the introduction of the REE, the 5 classes of REE, there will be no room for survival for the recycling industry. As the EPD considers the job opportunities for those who are now working in the recycling industry. Now, the recycling industry employ a lot of low-skilled workers who have low mobility. Is there any industry in 2018 which can start in 2018 and absorb all these employees if the recycling industry is not able to get a license? Does the EPD want all these unemployed to get CSSA? The EPD requires 3 months to issue an import and export license, and the cost is about $100,000 per license. It is very costly. There is a need to consult widely before implementing the REE regulation. Next, Mr. Kwok of the Wing Fat Metals Limited. I've been in the industry for 30 to 40 years. In the past, in Ableu Street, I collect WEEE. We repair some of the electronic and electrical equipment and sell it in the second-hand market, and the low-income earners can get our products. In the past decade, we have a factory, we have a warehouse, and we work on the dismantling and also repairing of electrical and electronic equipment. I used to have 18 workers, and I pay them 13 months per year. Now we have very few workers, and some don't even have anything to do. Albert IWS said that it would only it would have to receive advance notice for 3 days. But for us, we can go to collect WEEE on the same day. Many people are living in very small homes. If you just call us, and then we will go to collect the WEEE. Now the workers, the logistic workers, they collect the WEEE and then they bring the WEEE to us. And we also export the WEEE to third world countries. The present proposal by the EPD is out of touch with reality. It goes against the interests of the recycling industry and the workers. They should not pull water over the eyes of the public and also the electrical councillors. We are in the job of protecting the environment. The officials just dodging all the questions. In November, they had a consultation. I was in Korea. I asked my wife to attend the meeting. My wife returned crying. She said that there was no notice, there was no such meeting. Probably because we are not that well educated. They didn't even consult us. Next, Hong Tat Resources Recycling, Ms. Lau. I speak on behalf of Hong Tat. want to tell the chairman the recycling industry will suffer under the new law, and we really don't know what standard we should achieve. We are not allowed to do this, and we are not allowed to do that. We have not been given any clear guidelines. Now we have to pay rent, we have to pay wages to our workers, we face serious pressure. We have been in the industry for more than 20 years. We have not been consulted. We only knew this year that in 2010 the government claimed that it consulted the recycling industry. But those in the recycling industry do not know that the law was passed last year. If we had been told that the law had far-reaching implications on us, then we would have spoken out. The administration tries to close down all recycling industry. We should work together to oppose the bill. We have been working in the industry for many years, and yet now we have to close down our business. The government only claims that there are recyclers who damage the environment, but they're only the black sheep, a small number in the industry. The government should not adopt such a broad brush approach in handling the recycling industry. Now we have to be vetted by the EPD, and whether the application is successful or not, we still have to pay a fee. This is unreasonable, and it is disappointing. Next, Mr. Chiu. Chairman, with regard to the licensing arrangement for regulating WEEE, I think there is not enough consultation. Those in the industry, many of them have not been consulted. When the EPD called a briefing, that was the first time. They knew about it. How many people in the recycling industry have they consulted? Nobody knows. And it's also, the EPD also requires the process to be done on industrial land. But recycling is difficult to be conducted in industrial buildings, and there is not enough industrial land. Even if there is, rent is too high. Most of our works are done on brown field sites. Now some claim that WEE are imported into Hong Kong and they're dumped into the landfills. That is wrong. That's misunderstanding. The WEE imported are costly. We bought them, and there is transportation costs. We want to make full use of these WEEE. Buying refuse and then dumping them in landfill cannot be correct. After dismantling WEEE, we even make use of the last screw because it is steel, it is metal. And after dismantling, the plastic and metal will be separately recycled, and remaining is the circuit boards. Now we were told that circuit boards had been designated as chemical waste, but before we have not heard about it, and we are required to use to get an import and export license. But according to the Basel agreement, circuit boards can be imported and exported freely. Up till now, there is no import-export license granted, so that these circuit boards can be recycled. If they cannot be exported, let us turn to recycling locally. In 2016, there was an agreement signed, and investment will be made to have a recycling plant for circuit boards and turn them into a pure metal. But circuit boards are now called chemical waste, and investors may be deterred. With the change in policy, recycling business in Hong Kong will be killed. We need to work with government policy, but the government has to consider the room for survival of the recycling industry. and those workers will become unemployed. If no one engage in recycling business, then the recycling, the materials that used to be recycled will be dumped into the landfill. Next, Mr. Chow Chi-Leung.
Chairman, good morning. I'm from the Untitled Recycling Company. I work there since 2015. I've been working for the company to do dismantling work, and I've been in the trade for more than a decade. I'd like to let the chairman know that the workers in the recycling industry, because of the crackdown by the EPD, our bosses cannot provide enough work for us. Therefore, we used to work 25 days or more a month, but now we can only work about a little more than 10 days. Our income has sharply declined. We actually are employed in such a way that the more we do, the more pay we get. So there's no security for our livelihoods. Now coming today to that show, I've lost a day's income. I chose to come still because I want the government to know the plight that workers in the industry are facing. Every month we have to afford the rents for our household and also expenses, so we cannot really make ends meet. We are very down. And I try to look for other jobs, but because of lack of skills, I cannot look for better paying jobs. And now I've become a bit depressed. Last year, one day, I went up to the roof and had the thought of taking my own life. I'm still here today. I'm talking today because the police who arrived at the scene, the fire services officers who arrived at the scene persuaded me not to jump to my death. Chairman, please know that if the government wants to crack down on this field, there could be much repercussions. And this is really a complicated issue for the whole society. And workers in the trade have not got enough work, and even we have no jobs at all. So how can we survive if that continues? Can the government give us monthly payments to help us support our families? We want to earn income with our own hands. And why should you deprive us of the right to do that? Our fellow workers have no work, and that means that they will have no means to support the living and the family's living. Many workers facing the same issue would be tempted to take their own lives. Mr. Lee from the Liberal Party. Chairman, well, every day you said that Hong Kong generates 70,000 e-waste every year. The Liberal Party on the Amendment Bill in 2017 adopts an open attitude. But within the bill, there are two issues. One is to charge suppliers fees, that is charging as source. We are open about that, but we want to find out more about the fee charging levels. Should it be set that high, like in the case of televisions or fridges is $160 to $45 per piece? But the fees actually covers all sorts of brands and also models of TVs. But wouldn't be, in a way, encouraging the public to buy larger TV sets, and that would generate even larger amount of e-waste. Different sizes, brands, and even the different fees, different prices for different types of TVs exist, so you should exercise discretion at the fees charged as well. And also on the each TV set and fridge that is recycled, the Liberal Party very much encourages using them on a second-hand equipment to give to social enterprises or for recycling, and that can be more effective in reducing waste. And the Hong Kong government should encourage more social enterprises to collect used household appliances. And also on the licensing system, once there's regulations on it, that is practitioners or warehouses or recycling companies, I think if you are to get them to be covered by the licensing system, it will be actually stifling the survival of small and medium-sized companies. When we dismantle an EE, they just use a screwdriver, a simple tool to dismantle the equipment to collect metals, usable metals, a little bit of nick, or gold or little type of silver, so as to sell them for profits and continue their own business as a result. For other circuit board or other what you consider as harmful elements or components, you can just ask them to put these poisonous elements into a bag or other container to be taken to the EPD for recycling. That will be it. Otherwise, you will deprive SMEs of their survival chances. Hong Kong's recycling companies rely on a lot of these people working in the sector. Mr. Lee Po Hong, next, please. Good morning, Chairman. I've been in the recycling industry for 20 years. Since March 2016, the government passed the 2015 Amendment Bill. Even though the government had not fully consulted the EE recycling industry, we do want to continue to make contributions, yet we haven't got any clue. Why? Because of the legal requirements, all the export of regulated e-waste permit is required, and also you need to apply for e-processing licenses and so forth, and yet the EPD hasn't announced the requirements and the documents, the time and procedures needed for applying for the permit, so the industry has no idea what it should do in applying for the permit. And you've also, after third reading, it took you less than 1.5 years to finish the whole third reading process, and the government has not given us industry adequate time to apply for the relevant permit. So after the law came into effect, most of the EE recyclers, because they failed to apply for the permit in time, they were forced to close the businesses. And I wanted to actually have processed the recycled products, but because of the instability in the government's policy, we could not actually get the factories and workshops up and running in time. I've got several suggestions from the government now. I hope the government can consider them. I hope that you can give the industry a grace period of, say, 3 years to let the EPD have adequate time to communicate thoroughly with the sector and also talk about how to apply for a permit. And also the industry will have adequate time to make the preparation works. For example, changing land use, and also turning non-industrial land into industrial land, and to improve facilities to meet the requirements for the permit, so that we can meet the conditions required. And I hope that the government can provide adequate guidelines to let the industry have adequate time to understand the government requirements, and also please simplify the application procedures so that the time for applying for a permit can be shortened, to ensure that the ordinance, after it's taken effect, can still have enough recyclers to handle the 40,000 stockpile of e-waste. Next one, Ms. Jiang. The environmental protection ordinance, is it tailor-made for the Alba company? And you are providing $1.7 billion in compensation, and this is kind of compensation, and for manual dismantling would not reduce or cause any environmental nuisance. And the work of Alba will cause that there will be dumping of waste. The government's designated recyclers, Alba, actually monopolizes the price of recycling, and also drive the other smaller operators out of the market. And you need to consider the concerns of the recycling industry. You cannot tailor-make a piece of law for a particular enterprise. The birth of an enterprise comes at the expense of other small companies. Why should you allow such a law to be in place? Next one. Sorry, Miss Hui. Yeah, Miss Hui. Yeah. I'm a worker in the recycling industry who works at the container terminal. I heard that EPD has a recycling fund of $1 billion to help SMEs. I heard about it at the briefings, but I found that the thresholds for applying for such funding support are very high. And you said that the purpose of having this fund is to reduce the amount of waste at dumping grounds or landfills. But it doesn't really help with the operation survival of SMEs. The 10 billion environmental fund, actually, and also the allocation of tens of millions of dollars to other eco organizations, all these measures have not helped with SMEs in the recycling industry at all. The industry is very concerned that the $10 billion fund over by the government, how can it help the industry? And EPD has launched new regulations lately, but that deal a blow to the recycling industries, causing a slump in our businesses, and our companies have to lay off staff, and I'm worried of losing my job as well. Next one, Mr. Manchin Kit. Good morning. The government's plan to regulate the recycling of WEE, I think the whole exercise lacked consultation. And for WEE and also your idea under WPRS, the consultation only contacted 60 companies. Indeed, HKPC calculated that there are more than 200 companies in the field. So you only consulted about less than 3% of the practitioners in the industry. When we apply for the permit, we tried to get the approval, and yet we haven't received any news. The EPD asked for this and that information. Even the resume information of shareholders, directors of a company were asked for. We signed a large bulk of documents, and yet we don't know when the application process will be finished. The EPD at briefings talk about their flexible requirements and so forth, but the town planning, housing, fire services, town planning requirements, all these requirements were incorporated into their approval process, and yet it's taken ages, for us to get a permit. And once problems occur, they will shift the responsibility to other government departments. And because of that, practitioners in the industry are worried about that, and they're not take on new stocks. And we are worried of having to fold. And the application fee are in the tunes of $10,000, in the tune of $18,000, and that it really deals a heavy blow to the operations of SMEs here. Next one, Mr. Lee Kem-fong. Good morning. I'm not going to speak independently. I will hand over my time to Mr. Mann from a trade association. Okay. Mr. Mann from the Hong Kong and Kowloon Electrical Equipment Trade Association. Good morning. In 2017, April 26, the EPD distributed a paper that is the background brief of electrical for the regulation on the WEE, REE. I think various trade associations in the sector. I'd like to talk on behalf of them now, on behalf of all these trade associations. The electrical equipment suppliers and traders over the past few years have been in close communication with EPD. We've had meetings with them, and basically the EPD has adjusted the regulations, content of the regulations, and incorporated views from the sector. So therefore, our association supports what's in the paper. But one point here, on page 8, 15A, point 15A, where it proposes that the seller may specify up to 3 collectors, one of whom must be specified as the default collector, which undertakes to provide territory-wide removal services for every particular class of REE distributed by the seller. We have a different view. The sector feels that maximum 3 collectors, that's not enough to ensure proper service, particularly in high season. Shops will be very busy. So to avoid unnecessary trouble and controversies, we propose that the default collectors should be the number should be made raised to 5. And one of them should be logistics company. If you agree, we have confidence that in 3 days we will be able to serve the customers in need. Okay, next one is Mr. Tam, White Kid. As someone concerned about the environment and the boss of a recycling company, I like to say the following. Basically, I support the setting up of the large factory by the government because it's an effective way to deal with electrical equipment disposed by the public. But I'm prepared for some of the businesses to be snatched away by this large factory. But I'm prepared to still find my own niche. The problem now is that when I have to apply for the permit, there are 2 issues as mentioned by other fellow counterparts. In terms of applying for the permit, I think we would need to get 3 to 4 permits to do our work. Do we have the time, or does the EPD know how they can help us get the permit? That's a big issue. Secondly, as for the prices, I think it will cost up to $100,000 in fees. Not to mention whether we'll get a permit in the end, but $100,000 as the boss of a local company, myself, is, well, from the business perspective, you have to pay $100,000 without knowing whether it can, get back or have the same amount of stocks from Hong Kong. I would have much hesitations to pay for that, not knowing how much products I can get in return. So if you think that you want to help with the recycling industry, I think the recycling fund could, be made more useful. I know you're trying to think of ways to use up the fund anyway, so can you provide some sort of package to help with the electrical equipment recyclers? Thank you. And electronic equipment suppliers as well. Okay, thank you. I think of the 25 deputations have signed up to speak. I think 4 of them did not show up today. The others have spoken already. So maybe I'll open the time now for administration to respond. Maybe let me introduce today with us the administration present to answer deputations, views, questions. With us, we have Mr. Donald Ng, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection Department, and also Mr. Sansam Lai from EPD, and also Mr. David Wong, also from EPD, and Senior EP Officer from EPD, Mr. Gary Tam, and also Senior Government Counsel, Mr. Manuel Ng. So may I ask Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Donald Ng, to respond. Thank you, Chairman, and all the deputations for coming. On some views expressed, then let me try to respond. On the consultation for WPRS, in 2010, January to April, we carry out a public consultation on the plan and support measures, and also the legislative proposals. We did consult the public then, and LegCo, in the past, at various stages, had meetings with various organizations and listened to our views. In March last year, the amendment bill was passed by LegCo, approving the overall legislative framework. In 2016, the amendment bill, after it was approved, we arranged for a series of briefings with suppliers in the upstream and also those on the downstream. And also we met with companies, and we met with recyclers for electrical and electronic equipment recyclers, and we also stepped up our publicity work. On January 23rd and February 13th, and on other occasions, on the upcoming legislation, we briefed the environmental panel in LegCo. We briefed them, and members generally supported our moves. Besides public consultation and communication with the sector, just then I know there were views expressed about the arrangement for future regulations. But let me say this here. Right now, we are talking about a particular license here, but as for other licenses or permits for dismantling waste, we are not dealing with license for dismantling waste here. But PCB, what we are more concerned, we're not talking about chemical waste, but we are concerned about recyclers and waste processors who would need to get the chemical waste license, processing license. That's out of the discussion today. That's not covered by what we're going to make regulations on.
So we are now talking about the 4 types of EE and computer products. Many of you have expressed various views. You talk about the licensing requirements, how that will be like. Well, let me try to brief you. Now, for these 4 types of EEs and computer products, if the after the regulation commences, the processing procedures, a license is required, and we have submitted a commencement notice to the LegCo, and that is after the 16th of June, we will formally accept applications. Some deputations have said that we are not yet in the stage of accepting applications. That's right, because we have to wait till the June the 6th and 19th before we accept applications. In the recent past, we have talked to the trade to brief them on how the licensing requirements will be like, and we have different briefings for them, and we encourage them to come forth with views on our proposals so that we can do a better job in drawing up the licensing requirements. Now, let me talk about the main licensing requirements. Well, the licensing aims to ensure that these e-waste will be properly disposed of in the future. Second, we hope that the performance standards of the recycling trade can be enhanced. So under these principles, there will be several different licensing requirements. First, in terms of the operation, in terms of the dismantling, reprocessing, and recycling processes, all the environmental protection legislation has to be complied with. Second, we want to enhance the standards. So in terms of the recycling ratio, that should be mandated, and we're now coming up with a proposal of 80%. And also in dealing with e-waste, certain safety standards have to be complied with, say in terms of the fire safety requirements, the structures, and so on. So on top of the licensing requirements, we want to also ensure that the licensees can operate in compliance with other types of legislation as well. So we would be taking into account whether the applicant's premises meet with the relevant requirements in terms of planning, etc. Some deputations just now mentioned whether we are mandating that such operations should only be in industrial buildings. No, that's not the requirement. Overall, our requirement is that the licensees or the applicants' premises should meet with the relevant land use requirements. And some deputations have also mentioned about the time needed for enhancing the operations to comply with the licensing conditions. So in the future, in doing a licensing, we will have flexibility. Say if some applicants cannot fully meet with all the licensing conditions, we will consider issuing a short-term license to allow them a certain period to enhance the performance standards so that they can reach the all the requirements in the future. Some deputations have also mentioned about ALBA IWS, whether there will be an unfair competition, because ALBA IWS has a lot of information, they know how to apply for a license, whereas the other recyclers don't have such an advantage. I would like to say that for various stakeholders, including the potential applicants, we treat them equally. in terms of dissemination of information, we will treat everyone alike. In fact, if Alba IWS is going to operate in the future, it has to apply for a license as well. Some are concerned, as mentioned, about the upstream regulation aspect. How are we going to distribute the labels, and also for the number of collectors in doing the removal service? Can we increase the number from 3 to 5 so that there will be more flexibility for the trade? We are willing to talk further with the trade on that to see whether, in terms of the removal service, more instead of 3 collectors can be specified. I think there is room for further discussion. And there is also the mentioning about the worry that in terms of the capacity of Alba IWS, whether there is adequate capacity on their part. On the whole, Hong Kong produces 70,000 tons of e-waste, with 85% being e-waste. So Alba will be so what we needed to deal with is 50,000 tons, and at the beginning Alba has a capacity of 30,000 tons, and if needed they can enhance their capacity to deal with all the 50,000 tons of e-waste produced or has to be handled. As we said before, for the e-waste, which remains in Hong Kong, as the volume increases, it's not our plan that it should be handled all by the Alba IWS. Other licensed recyclers can also handle these e-waste. So as far as the downstream licensing requirements and also the upstream collectors, the number, I have responded in brief to those. So I'm willing to take further questions. So I'll now hand over the floor to questioning by members. Those members who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. So can the clerk help jot down their names? So we'll have 5 minutes each for including answers to questions. Mr. Shiu, Peter Shiu, will there be one round of this, or can we ask further questions in the second round? Yes, there will be a few rounds. The meeting is expected to end at around 12:45 p.m. But the public hearing will take up half of the meeting time. And we will, after the public hearing, we will continue to scrutinize the bill. So it doesn't mean that all the deputations will stay here until 12:45. Anyway, I'll be very flexible in allowing members to speak. Now, I am the representative of the wholesale and retail sector in the LegCo. For this paper, I have consulted the upstream trade players. And in previous meetings, I said this, they don't have an objection to this paper. But some deputations have asked that the number of collectors be increased from 3 to 5, and I think the government should seriously consider this. And some people in the trade have recently told me, now when you collect the used EEs, you allow the buyers to consider whether the used equipment will be collected back in 3 days. Well, that presents a problem in operation because Hong Kong is a small place. If we have the used or existing, say, an electric appliance staying in your home for 3 days, well, that is going to be problematic. And also, if the collection exercise is a different one from the delivery exercise, and it means that there will be there will be a sort of the vehicle or the transport processes will doubled. So, in terms of flexibility, the trade has some further suggestions. So if the buyer places order, then he will be given 3 days to consider when the goods will be delivered. So we should not say deliver the goods to the product to the buyer first, and then allow him 3 days to have the old the appliance collected. So that's the upstream side. No, not much of a problem. As for the downstream side, actually, I met with them yesterday. The deputations, well, for the environmental protection sector, they don't have a representative here on the electrical representing them. So all along, they are in the dark as to what's happening. So they told us that your proposal, say, will stifle the survival of some in the trade. Because in terms of the licensing, if the operations have to be done in industrial land, then that's going to be a problem. They can't bid for industrial land. They have great difficulties in doing that. So they cannot meet with your requirement on having the operation on industrial land and having them meet with the fire safety regulations and so on. And the timetable is very tight, so that's again to be a problem. So they are asking for a grace period of 3 years, and they may have to sign, say, they have already signed a tenancy for 2 to 3 years for existing operations. How can they all of a sudden turn to somewhere else to continue with their operation? So, Deputy Director, in 3 days requirement in the upstream aspect, the consumers will make the request, and Albert IWS is required to provide the collection service within 3 days. Of course, consumers would like the delivery and the collection to be happening on the same day. But sometimes the delivery may not be done on the same day as the placing of the order. So can we arrange for the same day for the delivery and the collection processes? Well, that can be considered. Now, you've mentioned about how the 3 days are calculated. Can we talk more to the trade? Well, definitely that can be done. We'll try to let them know of our arrangement. On the licensing regime, if in the future a trader wants to do recycling, they need to get a license. Well, for existing operations, they still have to meet with certain legal requirements already. So whether it's in the present operations or when there is a licensing regime in the future, the operators must make sure that their premises meet with certain legal requirements. Now, in the future, you may appreciate the fact that it will be impossible for us to issue a license when the applicants or the operators are not meeting with the licensing requirements. And we're not mandating that the operations or the premises should necessarily be on an industrial plot. As long as they meet with the application requirements, then that's okay. Some traders have asked for a grace period of 3 years. Can that be considered? Well, so that they can rest reassured that they don't have to really do something, say, very soon. On the commencement date, our plan is that now for the commencement notice is subject to negative vetting, and starting from the 19th of June, we will start accepting applications. Now, as for the regulation or the implementation of the licensing requirement, another commencement notice is needed. And our plan is that it will be only by the end of this year will the licensing regime be put in place. Now, as to whether a longer period be allowed for the traders to make an application. Now, before we accept formal applications, we are already communicating with the trade. Say if they are not interested, they're not very clear about the licensing requirements, we will still communicate with them. And maybe they can provide certain information to us for our advice, and hope that through doing such work, we can expedite the vetting process in the future. So second round for you, Mr. Gary Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I support in handling e-waste properly, and I also support the polluter pays principle. I understand that when a new piece of legislation is enacted, certain impact will be made on the existing stakeholders, but I haven't imagined that the impact can be so great. There are some 2,600 small traders and some 100,000 workers in the trade may be affected. Mr. Charles said that he didn't have enough work, so much so that he wanted to kill himself. So in enacting the legislation, we must ensure that we strike a balance between environmental protection and ensuring the livelihood of the workers affected. In fact, whenever past legislation on environmental protection was enacted, the government did try to strike a balance. In the last term, the government handed out $10 billion to help the trade to replace the old diesel vehicles, and they've been postponing the enactment date of the ordinance as well, because they knew full well that they had to still allow the trade to survive whenever new legislation are put in place. There were so many traders here in Hong Kong, and once the legislation is enacted, 100,000 people will lose their jobs, 2,600 enterprises will have to wind down. Now, they have made this a very clear demand. There should be a grace of period of 3 years. Is this asking too much? Well, I want to tell the chairman there was a precedent. I worked on I was the chairman of the private columbarium bills committee. And many unlicensed columbaria were operating on illegally occupied land, and the government was allowing them 3 years to regularize their operations. Now, if they can't do that within 3 years, then, well, too bad. You have to, close down your business. So that was this precedent. So for this piece of legislation, can the government consider allowing more space for the traders so that the traders can work on, say, rezoning their land plots and enhancing their performance? So first, I would like the government to clarify this. First, my understanding is that in dismantling simple electrical appliances not involving PCBs, no license is required. And it's only after this law is enacted will they need a license. Is that the case? Deputy Director? 2 members and a number of deputations have raised several issues of concern to them. First is about the licensing conditions and requirements. Second is about the timetable. Well, you said that you will start accepting application on the 19th of June. So during the application period, can they still continue with their operation? Is there a grace period or what? Well, I think the 2 questions are similar in nature. I believe that they didn't mean that you would only be accepting applications, say 3 to 5 years later. You would now accept applications, but is there a grace period? And you mentioned that there will maybe a short-term license for people who are waiting for their official licenses to be approved. So can the Deputy Director clarify all these points? And also, many deputations have this understanding that the operations should be on industrial land in the future. But then the Deputy Director sounded otherwise. So can you be very clear on all these issues, please, in response to the questions made by the deputations? For the 4 types of electrical appliances and computer products, is there a license needed now? No, before, pending the enactment of the legislation, there is no license required. If the processes concerned do not involve chemical waste or hazardous waste, then no license is required. As for the commencement date for the licensing regime, now, as I said, we will start accepting applications on the 16th of June, and the vetting process takes time. So hopefully, by the end of the year, the applicants would have already obtained a license. Then the whole licensing regime will take effect. that the licensing regime will take effect towards the end of the year. Now, in the course of the license application, if we find that, say, the individual applicants are trying to comply with the certain fire safety and land requirements, and they are yet to comply with such requirements, and then if we find that if we give them a license, the, say, environmental protections and safety aspects will not be compromised, then we can consider issuing a short-term license. But of course, the overriding premise is that they are still they are already in the process of trying to get, say, building approval from the buildings department and so on, and that may take time. So pending their approval from the relevant departments, we can still consider issuing them a short-term license for them to enhance their performance standards and comply with the relevant licensing conditions.
And after they've met all the licensing requirements, we'll issue them a long-term license. That's the approach. Now, there's a suggestion that there will be no license requirement, no licensing requirement. That's not our suggestion. As for commencing the licensing requirement up to 3 years, that is not our intention. Now, Mr. Chen, now suppose the law is deferred by 2 to 3 years to commence, what will be the impact on the overall government policy? What will be the impact on our overall environmental situation? The Deputy Director. Well, we want to have a licensing system to make sure that the handling of the REE items are properly dealt with. If the scheme is deferred by 2 to 3 years, the objective cannot be achieved. Say in the upstream, Chairman, no, my apologies. Excuse me. You better let the DD finish his reply. I'll give you some time later. Now, there may be retailers on the upstream who are required to deal with the old EE. That's a requirement. The retailer will have to send the REE to a license collector. So without the licensing scheme, the retailer will not get a licensee, a license collector to deal with the REE. Now, my understanding is that this is to prevent WEEE in our landfill. This is not to upgrade the operational standard. If you want to upgrade operational standard, you don't need the law. You can train them. You can have voluntary requirements. I want to ask a question. Now, you have to wait again. I just let you express your view. Professor Yeo. Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions. I think there is a misunderstanding. It is rather complicated. There are 2 things before us. First, the commencement notice of an ordinance. This is not a new piece of legislation. The ordinance was enacted last term, and this is to announce the commencement notice. This is different from the deferring the regulation, or that this is different from licensing requirements. So there is a misunderstanding. Can the DD therefore clarify this point? Now, you have reiterated that you have not announced the commencement date for licensing requirements. You will come back to this council again. So it's rather confusing. So is it about the commencement of the licensing arrangement? It seems that it is not. I think you will have another commencement notice, and before that people can make applications. And have you consulted the competition authority? I'm afraid that you may have some problem with competition law. Say you have a proposed fee level. This may be in breach of the competition law. Why don't you allow the market to decide on the pricing while you have a proposed levy or proposed fee level? Well, this is a levy. This is a bit different in nature. The DD. On the two questions asked by Professor Yu, as for timing, let me put it more clearly. There are different legal procedures. The 19th of July is the starting date for receiving application. The licensing requirements have not come into effect. We have to go through another legislative process by the end of the year to deal with the licensing requirements. By then, the licensing system will commence. The commencement notice on the 19th of June only enables us to receive applications. The principal ordinance was enacted last year. Today, or rather, this commencement notice is not a new law. The commencement notice is about the commencement date of the ordinance. There is an upstream regulation, a piece of subsidiary legislation. This is to clarify the recycling levy, the registration requirements, and the like. This is not the concern of the downstream recyclers. It is about the distributors, the requirements for the distributors and the retailers. They are regulated by a piece of subsidiary legislation. Today's concern is about the downstream requirements. As for the levy, as explained by the chairman, this is a levy charged by the administration. It has nothing to do with breaching competition law. Many people are concerned, many deputations are concerned that you give it to a big organization or big institution. It's sort of a monopoly, isn't it? Will there be a monopoly which is in breach of competition law? As for the future operation, whether it's the ALBA IWS or other licensed recyclers handling the regulated EE, so there is, it is not just limited to ALBA IWS. Other recyclers can also apply. If they've got a license, they can deal with the REE goods. But in terms of starting point, will there be any difference? Now they comply, their plants comply with the requirements. You may have to consult the competition committee. The small operators have difficulties in applying for a license. You ask them many questions, they have to make many submissions. But a big market participant, will a big market participant obtain any advantage? Would there be any unfair competition? Now we treat everybody equal, whether it is the ALBA or other applicants. We will adopt the same standard in handling the application. Next, Mr. Hui. Thank you, Chairman. I think the deputations and individuals are concerned about the future of their business under the new law. And this is, and the worry is warranted. With regard to the licensing requirements for downstream recyclers, the major problem is that they don't know what the requirements are. Is it because of land or because of industrial land, the shortage of industrial land? Can they address, can the department address their questions? You say the licensing scheme is free, is equal for all. But we have to know who will be able to get the license. How do you set the standard? Do you think those who are at present in the recycling business are in breach of the rules. They are causing environmental pollution. Is it your concern, and therefore you set a very high standard so that those polluting businesses, polluting operators will be squeezed out of the business? Can you tell us the objective of your standard? The DD. Concerning the situation described by Mr. Hui, people are concerned about land use. How do we give approval? In the licensing process, we consider the operation of the premises, whether the operation is in line with land use. For example, they operate within a green belt. This is not in line with the land use of a green belt. Recycling cannot be conducted on a green belt zone. This breaches the land use. Therefore, we cannot issue a license to this operation. Now, the operation has to in line with the planned intention, but this is not just limited to industrial land. Say, they can have different permitted land use. So it is not just limited to industrial land. What about pollution? Turn them into less polluting operations. Is it the standard for licensing? Yes, the pollution. We have existing licensing, existing pollution standards. We have to make sure that the applicant is in line with the relevant discharge and pollution restrictions. Any follow-up questions? No more? Okay. Those who have who want to have a first round of question? Yes, Mr. Ho. 5 minutes. Thank you for not leaving me out. Well, I just reminded you to raise your hand. Well, I did raise my hand, but it's not on the record. Anyways, please, go ahead. Well, I'm a bit confused, having heard the explanation. The law is to reduce the pressure of WEE on our landfill. This is one of the reasons to cut waste at source. The 5 classes of our EE will be controlled. Now the trade says that there is not enough consultation. Quite a large number of workers are in the recycling industry. Now you say that you will start application on the 19th of June, and then at the end of the year you will set out the licensing requirements. They are concerned about the premises conditions, or the conditions of the premises. It seems that things are not clear, and now you will soon start the requirement for application. Now, since the 5 classes of our EE are not a major concern, and some claim that the dismantled materials should be dumped into the disposal, the landfill. It seems that there is a bit of confusion. Can you defer the arrangements or the requirements? Say, can you spell out the conditions? Say you don't allow them to operate in a green belt. Now they have been in application. They have been in operation, and they go to lands with an application. It's very difficult to apply to lands. And can you help them? Say you can grandfather their arrangement, or you give them a short-term waiver so that they can have some room to maneuver. This will reduce suffering of the industry. Now, you are not giving favor to V factory, but you allow the V factory to establish first. They will handle the 5 classes of our EE. But as for the 2,000 odd businesses, they will have to apply later. And there are many hurdles. though the requirements are not very clear. So that's de facto killing these industries, and they are not dumping their waste into the landfill. As at the end of the day, Hong Kong's economy will suffer because of the closing down of these businesses. Now, can you defer the commencement date, to the end of the year? I think that's a reasonable suggestion. I think the department should not be bureaucratic. Now, you don't want the waste to be put into the landfill. Then lands should be favorable to these businesses. If they're operating on brownfield sites, tidy up the land, give them a short-term waiver, as long as they are not on greenbelt. Can you do consultation first before having the commencement, and then work through various departments to facilitate the applicants? The DD. Concerning the points raised by Mr. Ho, I'll try to answer them. Concerning ELBA and other applicants or existing operators, as I've explained, the requirements are the same. They have to apply for licenses. As for ELBA, we have yet to accept applications. ELBA cannot apply now. After the system commences, then all the operators, including ELBA, will have to apply for a license. We treat them equally. We do not just issue a license to ELBA. We understand that we have to communicate fully with the industry. On licensing conditions, we have been contacting the trade in the past few months. We also hope that they can provide us the information. They can talk to us as on the operation and whether the present operation can comply with the licensing conditions or prospective licensing conditions. And also, they can ask us about the future requirements. Mr. Ho asked if we can defer the commencement, and we don't accept any application on starting from the 19th of June. Now we have to make sure that the 5 classes of our EE will be properly disposed of. If someone wants to do the disposal downstream, they have to obtain a license. This is a whole system. We cannot just have the upstream arrangement of imposing a levy for a collection service and without having the downstream arrangements ready. Now we have had lengthy discussion on application, and if the operation is not in line with the land use and application, an applicant will not get a license. Is it possible to issue a license without imposing any requirement? I have to make sure that the operation has to comply. The operation has to comply with all the licensing requirements and also the requirements of other government departments. It is impossible for us to issue a license which is in breach of the requirements of the law. Now you may have a second round of questions, members. But I will ask my first round of questions. I hope the DD can explain to us the following. I think there is a common question on licensing conditions. If you can spell out the licensing conditions and the trade feels that they can comply and they're already complying with these conditions, then they have no worry about it. But if you set up standards which are in line with the environmental protection and sustainable development, then people will support that. And there are also exemptions. So can you let everybody knows what these requirements are and what the exemptions are? some of the operators are very small operators. Can they be exempted? Or do they fall within the exempted areas? Can the DD explain that as well? Thank you, Chairman. Well, let me highlight the important requirements. And as for the specific requirements, I will ask my colleagues to explain further. The operation of the premises will have to comply with the pollution control requirements. The operator has to provide an operation plan and what is the percentage of recycling. And the requirement for us is 80% at least. And the operation has to comply with building and fire safety requirements.
And lastly, we need to consider the compliance with other requirements, for example, in terms of land uses. So those are the main areas. But for details, how do we set the conditions and so forth, in the future, we'll provide the sector with the relevant information. But maybe I'll ask Mr. Wong to supplement. Mr. Wong, yeah. Mr. David Wong, yes, AD. On the license for processing e-waste, our plan is that we will list, of course, a number of conditions in line with the relevant ordinance. So as the DD just said, for the premises or the site concerned, in terms of operation, we will ask that all applicants provide a plan for their operations, the purpose of which is that since at every site, the dismantling, categorizing, processing, or other procedures may vary from site to site, we want to know clearly the actual arrangements in terms of operations at a site. And there are also some basic requirements. For example, if there are discharges, then the owner concerned must comply with the current regulations of, for example, discharge of chemical elements or water, wastewater and so forth. And there should be a minimum of 80% of recycling rate, because we want to make sure that the materials, the products, and the amount of imports and the categorization, dismantling, processing will result in certain amount of other components. And if there is waste to be disposed of after the recycling work, I hope that that would be less than 20%. As for the premises, the management of it and maintenance, safety of the premises, we do have certain requirements. For example, within the plant, recycling plant, if there are procedures for processing, all the equipment, facilities concerned will be required, so that there will be a shelter, but not actually an open air operations, because we want to prevent waste, say in raining times or when the weather is bad. We don't want to see any harmful substances being washed out, when the weather gets bad. So therefore, we must avoid an open-air operation. And we also avoid any excessive accumulation of materials that would block fire exits. Some premises have to deal with a large amount of stocks. for dismantling of REEs. So if there is such stockpiles, then we will require that these stockpiles should not be exposed to rain or shine. So they must be sheltered. We're not asking for sealed, tightly sealed enclosures for these stockpiles, but they just need to be at least be sheltered at least on 3 sides, and there should also be caution exercised, so that when there are waste lying on the ground, these waste or components should not seep underground. And none of the substances should be allowed to seep underground. And there's also the mention just then that we don't want to see, when the weather gets bad or when it rains heavily, that waste or substances will be actually discharged from the premises, so that we must avoid flooding to begin with, so that no harmful substances would be flushed out of the premises. And also for the operations, there must be indemnity insurance, and we would ask the operators providing such information on the insurance. And as for whether there's dismantling, categorization, or dismantling of waste that generate harmful substances, if there are such substances emitted, they need to let us know in writing, and what they will do to meet the standards for environmental protection. And we also consider whether at the site concerned there's any contingency measures. For example, in terms of management, there are people who will be on duty to deal with any contingencies. And whether there will be arrangements for staff to know about the contingency measures as well. Hardware and operations, I think that's about it, what I've just said. Another point is that as for the 80% recycling rate, it's not that we will micromanage, what's happening at a plant every day, but our main purpose is to make sure that, for example, annually, on the whole, how much REEs are handled and whether they are categorized and turned into useful materials, and some others are being reprocessed. So we ask the operator to have a mechanism to keep a record of such information, so that we can check later on to make sure that they fulfill the 80% criterion. I think that's the main point for the requirements for operations. We have made reference to our other regulations on control on waste, other waste, and so forth. So the requirements, of course, these are new ones. So as the DD just said, in the past few months we have communicated with the sector, but in the coming months still we will be actively, discuss with any interested parties, any areas that they're not clear about, and if necessary, when the time comes for the licensing, we can make fine-tuning of any of the plan now. DD, yes, I believe that the sector, I think, is concerned that about the licensing conditions, that the thresholds are too high, so that they may not be able to get the licenses required. But as I just said, for the licensing conditions, they are actually very similar to other licenses that are on offer. I understand the sector is worried that they may not be able to get the licenses required, but based on the information provided from some interested parties, we see that it's not that they won't be able to get the licenses concerned. I think with more communication, these sectors' concern or worry would be eased. Okay, 2 questions here. One is about, I just heard from Mr. Wong that the licensing conditions, they seem reasonable, but I want to know whether you have any draft of what you're going to do, like what Mr. Wong just said. Have you got any draft on your plans so you can use it to communicate with the sector? So anyone with concerns, still you can try to make changes. You want to accept applications on June 19, so there's just 4 weeks to go. Are you sure that you have the materials ready? We're not talking about reasonable thresholds here, so if you can show them to the sector, then that'll be good. And also I heard from a deputation about exemptions. Can you respond to the question on exemptions? Yes. On the licensing conditions, at the last meeting we discussed whether we can provide papers. Yes, we will provide you with papers very soon on the licensing conditions. Indeed, in the past, we have communicated with the sector on those conditions, and we can provide them in the paper, definitely, in writing. And as for there can be exemptions, as I just said, the main ordinance was passed last year, so this is just about, now we're talking about the commencement dates. As for the licensing regime itself, there isn't any exemption, because exemption is only limited to very, very small size. But that's already been dealt with by the main ordinance. So, as that is, if the area does not exceed 50 square meters, that's available for that's covered by the exemption. But that's been dealt with by the main ordinance. I think the sector is not clear what is dealt with by the ordinance and what is covered by the regulation. So, of course, after the law comes into effect, all the exemptions will become valid. But if they come under the exemption, then they will not be worried. But many of the deputations today are small and medium-sized recycling companies. So, since you have this distinction, maybe you can also briefly, since we now are face-to-face with the sector, so maybe you can explain a bit more to them. As for the arrangement for exemptions, maybe I'll ask Mr. Lai to elaborate. Yes, based on the main ordinance passed last year, the following 3 types of works will not be regulated. But that is, if, for example, the work concerned does not involve the REE with chemical waste, and if the area of the operations does not exceed 100 square meters, then they would not be required to obtain a license. The works include storage and dismantling of the equipment. Another type is that the EE, that is, another category is just the storage of EEs. And the size of the equipment does not exceed 1 container or 50 square meters. The third category is, again, only the storage in industrial buildings, in warehouses, in industrial buildings, and they do not need to acquire a license for storage of REEs. I think all this information should be presented clearly to the sector, so that some of the worries can be removed. And as for the licensing condition, I recall that at the first meeting, some members asked the same question. Even though the regulation would not cover the licensing conditions, but they are related still. So as I just said, you hope that you want to accept applications from June 19. But if the draft papers for the base licensing conditions are not known to the sector, I mean, it's understandable that they will be worried. Okay, I've just stated my views. Second round now. First one is Shiu Ka-fai. I'd like to ask the department Section 40 of the ordinance is that when that is in Section 40, I think it's to do with the right to own something. That is request for removal services. So a request for removal service must be made before the expiry of 3 days after the consumer takes actual possession of the distributed equipment. So this is actually in relation to Article 14 of the regulation. As for, in general terms, it means that after a product is delivered, then within 3 days, the consumer can still get it. Didi, I think my question is, well, within 3 days, this period of before the expiry of 3 days, this means that the consumer must make the request. But we're worried that when the new product is delivered, and if the consumer does not make the request within 3 days, then that could be a discrepancy. But if the consumer, when he buys the product, he makes the removal service request, then maybe the new product may be delivered to his home only 3 days later. Then that would mean that that is an old equipment will be taken away when the new one arrives. If that would be an ideal scenario, but in law, you give the consumer the right to have the product taken away 3 days later. So the seller will be in trouble because he could have removed the old one when he delivers the new one. But now in this case, the way that it's written may require the seller to go to the consumer's place twice to take back the old equipment 3 days later. Yeah, we heard during the consultation that there must be a period. So there must be a period given. So the sector proposed that we should give a time frame, asking the consumer to, within the time frame, have the old equipment removed. So we're proposing a 3-day period after the new product has arrived. I understand your concern that whether the consumer, because of, or it just so happens that the seller will be in an inconvenient situation where they have to go to the consumer's place twice, because it's best for the old equipment to be taken away when the new equipment arrives. So we don't want to see 2 pieces of electrical equipment at the same premises at the same time. But I think the consumer himself should make appropriate arrangement. If you want to shorten the period, that is the consumer, when he buys a product within 3 days, he must make the removal request. Then that we need to think about the time given to the consumer to let him consider whether he wants to get rid of the old equipment. I just have reservations on this section. I think we need to, the department should better look at it. Now let's talk about downstream, issues about the downstream and exemptions for 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet, and so forth. But I think actually we are talking about a very small number of companies that can be exempted. Now June 19, that will be the time for applications to begin, but they are in the dark. They don't know what are the clauses or conditions concerned. That means that on that day they won't make any applications. But yes, I know June 9th will be the time when they can begin applying for the license. But nobody knows what are the clauses for the licenses. Is that right, DG? As I just mentioned, June 19 is the formal day for applications to be received, but we've been in communication with the sector in the past as for the future licensing conditions and how we're going to vet the applications. We've communicated with them already, but on June 19, that's not the only day. But when is the period for application? After all, can you be more specific? How long is the application period? Yeah, that's the beginning date, but we don't have a deadline per se on the latest when they can apply. But I think many in the sector don't really know what are the conditions. And now you're going to commence the regulation for REEs. So when they want to receive or collect the old equipment, but when can they start collecting the old equipment? I think DD hopes to see the application or licenses to be, that is after June 19 when they begin applying, and those who do not meet the conditions, they may be given a short-term license. But it seems like the DD means that by the end of the year, that is the operators need to have a license to continue their business. So, and also, is that correct? And also, if the licenses, when would the license become effective? And I think we do need to announce more specific dates.
So please look carefully again at the timetable, whether it's feasible. So the Deputy Director, please look at the reality and tell us clearly exactly what is a feasible timetable. Yes, we will start a second application on the 19th of June, and our plan is that towards the end of the year, only licensed operators can operate. And we would also have to go through certain procedures, and there will be another document on the commencement date, which has to be scrutinized, approved by the LegCo before the commencement takes effect. Our plan is to have the commencement date by the end of this year, and that the licensing regime will be introduced to them. Of course, we know that the operators will need time to comply with the regulations. We will have to look at the actual situation before we see when we will introduce the notice for scrutiny by the LegCo. Well, can I spend some more time to talk about the issues of my concern? Professor Edward, you said that this is a principal ordinance. Now, on the 19th of June, people have to make an application. They hope that the application can be granted by the end of this year. Now, assume that they can't get that by the end of the year. It means that they cannot continue operation. That means they have to wind down. So, Alba will take up all the operations then. So it's impossible to do that. You have to allow people to make the transformation. Well, indeed, they have consulted the people, those on the upstream side. But then the green groups, they are also from the business sector. They don't have a representative here representing them at the LegCo. Then you just cast them aside. They are going to close down. They don't have enough time to do all the work. You talk about having the roof and so on and so forth. Well, how many of them do you expect that they can really comply by the end of the year? Now, we've heard your views loud and clear. So this doesn't fall under the ambit of the regulation, which is now being dealt with by the subcommittee. We are talking about the commencement date for the licensing regime. That's something separate. Of course, these two are related. And for the principal ordinance, the promotion of recycling and proper disposal, electrical equipment and electrical equipment amendment ordinance 2016, commencement notice 2017, as we said in the last meeting, well, there were really, the commencement dates have to really be implemented, or else we won't be able to proceed with anything else. So we will we will continue scrutinizing this piece of subsidiary legislation, but I believe that the administration has heard views from the trade and what their concerns are. Mr. Gary Chan, second round. I will speak again. Yes, that can be. You can speak again. The administration, can you give us a paper in writing on the commencement dates, because it sounds very confusing. So if we have something in black and white, then that would facilitate our work. Second, Mr. Peter Shiu made a very good point. We are now discussing the 16th of June commencement date, and people can start making applications. But the traders that over there are worried that once the commencement date, after the commencement date, say within half a year, then they have to close down. So apart from the date, discussing the date of June the 19th, we are also discussing whether they can still survive. Now, the government, when you formulate environmental protection policy, usually these come with subsidy schemes to help the trade transform and upgrade. So on the REE, regulator EE, what measures do you have to help this the recycling trade? Now, for the transport sector, you give them $10 billion to help them tide over the operation difficulties. What are you doing to the recycling trade? Mr. Wong talked about that there are a lot of requirements in relation to pollution control. Now, have you made an assessment of how many of them here, sitting here, can get a license after 19th of June? There are now 2,600 SMEs in the recycling trade. How many of them can get a license? So if the answer is just only one, Alba, who is sitting over there, then you are treating the recycling trade unfairly. Now, you have a starting line for everyone on the 19th of June. But what about Alba? You've given them $550 million to build the plant. Of course, they can meet with your environmental protection regulation. If you're giving the same amount to all the other traders, all of them, I'm sure, can get the license. So, what is that? Is what you're doing fair or unfair? Now, from the 19th of June up to the end of the year, ultimately, you may find that only one company, Alba, can get a license. This is something that we want to see. And Chairman, when the administration responded to members' questions, they said that Alba has a capacity of 5,700 tons every year. So they can deal with all the e-waste produced in Hong Kong. So even if these traders can get a license, I mean, can they make ends meet? Deputy Director, Mr. Gary Chen raised several questions. One is licensing conditions. Of course, we will provide the paper after the meeting, and also the timetable, our plans, etc. can also be provided. In fact, in past papers, we said that the licensing regime can be introduced and take effect by the end of the year, and that's set out in previous papers. Maybe we can consolidate information a bit to come up with a paper setting out all the information more clearly. Now, you are also concerned about whether the licensing requirements are too harsh and it's a tall order, so much so that the traders in the recycling field cannot obtain a license. Well, we have taken reference from the licensing conditions of similar types of operation and drawn up our licensing regulations, and we make sure that these are in line with environmental protection requirements. You can take a look whether these conditions are too harsh. The overriding principle is to ensure that these REE can be disposed of properly in the future. That's the basic principle in coming up with the licensing conditions. And also, in terms of the handling the applications of license, can we have more flexibility? We'll defer it after the end of this year. This time, we are now asking you to scrutinize the commencement date on which we can accept applications from the trade. A member asked whether we can make an assessment of how many of the traders can secure a license. I think the first step is that we must have the applications in front of us before we can make the assessment. Of course, in our informal communication with them, we have tried to get some information on their existing operations and their future plans. We do have some basic understanding on that. And before the end of the year, when the licensing regime takes effect, then we can deal with all the applications. So June the 19th is the first step, and on that day we will start applications, accepting applications. I think for the, let me suggest this. After the members have asked for a second round, the public hearing will end, but then we'll still continue with our meeting. We will continue scrutinizing the subsidiary legislation. And the first part is for the public hearing for deputations to give their views, and the second part of the meeting will be the scrutiny of the regulation. And when we do that, we would certainly take on board the views given by the deputations. It doesn't mean that we will stop asking our questions. For the second round, we still have Mr. Junius Ho, Ted Hui, and Mr. Peter Shiu. So maybe should we give them, the deputations, the extra time to speak? Well, that's not how the public hearing is arranged. But if you have questions for the deputations, then you can ask them. But we won't have the time for the deputations to give further views. Will that be a third round? Yes. Well, if that is the case, I have questions for them. I would like them to be there still. Well, that's not the usual arrangement for a public hearing, because we have to go into our own scrutiny of the legislation. Now, after the public hearing, so the deputations, individuals can leave the meeting room. Now you have time. You will be after Mr. Ted Hui. Well, you'll have a third round because you've already done with your second round. So, Mr. Ted Hui, you have a second round. Yes, a point of order. Maybe in the second round, maybe we can be allowed to direct our questions to the deputations. You can do so in your speaking time. You can ask the deputations questions, and they can respond. But you haven't done that. Make use of your time to do that. So is it that we want a third round? You still want them to be here, right, in the third round of questioning? Okay, third round then. Deputations can still stay. So the public hearing will end after the third round of questioning has been done. So you will stay a bit longer. I believe that you don't mind. The discussion is very heated, and we want to do the best job in this regulatory matter. Mr. Junius Ho, Deputy Director, I have just one question. The only one meeting the licensing requirement is Alba, but you said no, because you haven't started really processing the applications that will only begin on the 19th of June, and there will be many licensing conditions involved, and you will have watched closely the applications from other traders. Now for Alba, actually in the first quarter we approved a sum for building the facility, and we have actually tailor-made a plan for Alba. The facility was completed in December, and there was a trial going on or starting in April. So we've tailor-made the facility for Alba. Well, I know that we need a flagship company to lead the work, but let's be fairer. Let's not try to stifle the existence of other operators. Let's pass a fair comment here. The government needs Alba to take the lead in the work. That's no problem. That's fine. But you should not say that you are being very fair here. Well, there are two licensing conditions which may cause a problem. Mr. Wong referred to having a cover for the premises. I don't think they will be worried about the building cost, but the biggest problem is getting approval from the Lands Department for the modification of the grant. and it's very difficult to get the cover, say, for the for certain GFA. Now, if you have residential development, commercial development, which should be harsh, that's understandable. But these are existing operators. And your fourth condition is that in terms of the premises, you need a cover. For storage, a cover is also required. It's not that they don't want a cover, but then you are asking them to do work on something very difficult. So it's very difficult for them to get a license. So can EBD, while on the one hand trying to be environmentally friendly, then on the other hand should be trying to not to stifle their existence? You should give them support. You should not just allow to operate. Now, what about the buffer period? Why can't that be done? In terms of the regulations, you can allow for extension of the time. And you maybe say, subject to certain things, pending the building of a cover, then, well, we can still allow you to continue with your operation. As long as you are willing to spend the money to put in the proper installations, we'll help you. So I'm not seeing such efforts on the part of the EPD. EPD should work on this regulation, but then you should not be just allowing only one company to operate while stifling or chasing or driving away the others out of the market. So, Mr. Chu, from top, from from top row, yes. You asked for 3 years. Can you tell us more? And what about the conditions? How do you feel about them? In terms of the requirement in industrial land, now our land use now is on greenbelt, AGR, agricultural land, open storage, and other comprehensive CDAs as well. EPD said that operations are allowed only on industrial land, where they've been categorical about that. But so we can't meet with the requirements. So, and why we need 3 years extension for the regulation? We are very pessimistic about this. Even if we close down, we still have a lot of work to do. We've signed, say, a tenancy agreements or contracts for 3 years, 5 years. We need time to wound the business down. And if we can't get the export permit, well, a lot of traders said that they will have great troubles. And it takes more than 4 months to for the EPD to process the applications, and all other goods are now here stockpiled in Hong Kong. It's not that we want to overturn the regulation altogether. Even if we want to wind down, we still have to complete the tenancy agreement. If we are to wind down the business in half a year, then we have to make a compensation of millions of dollars to the other party. And actually, many of the recyclers are of sizable scale. They've made an investment of over $5 million. So even if we are selling the, say, the scrap metal to another subsidiary of the company, it takes time. And we need time to actually dismiss our staff also. So in March, I have asked the EPD, REE, is it considered chemical waste? The EPD officer said then, I called them up, and the EPD officer said that, well, the REE is not implemented yet. Well, call up in the future after the legislation has been enacted. Do you call this communication? We're still unclear about so many points. Are REE considered chemical waste? And I've only learned about this from the last meeting, that REE are not considered chemical waste. So if that is the case, why should there be harsh requirements on them? Now, concerning the label, Alba in February told the traders very clearly that the sellers and manufacturers can hand over the products for them for handling as long as they have a label. But we still are not unclear about how the labeling system will work. Well, up to this very moment, I'm still unclear. Mr. Ng talked about the basic principles. I thank him for that. But on the details, we are actually at sea as to what is required. It's not just myself. The entire recycling industry is at sea as to how the details will work. I think the administration is clear on your concerns and worries. So, Deputy Director, do you have anything to add? On the licensing conditions, if Mr. Chu thinks that the communication is not good enough, we are more than happy to work more on that front, and we will communicate with the trade on the licensing conditions.
Next, Mr. Hui. Many members and also deputations have accused you of being unfair. You just favor a particular factory, you give it subsidies and favors and a lot of information. Fairness is very important. You have a contract with Alba. You have a tendering process. You invite the bidders. Did you include all the parties? Is it open to all invitation? You want to have a big factory to replace small and medium-sized ones. Is it your target? You want to have a large-scale factory? You believe that the present recycling businesses are not able to cope with the volume of business in the future. Is it the case? You need to explain that to us. Now they say that they are confused. Is it possible to put down in black and white your licensing requirements? Give them the requirements earlier so that they can have the requirements in their hands and they can try to comply. Can you do that? The DD. Whether we do have a plan to have only Alba to do the processing, we have no such intention, as I said earlier. When we introduced the PRS, we made an assessment, and we had to make an assessment whether there was enough processing capacity. Our assessment at that time was that with the introduction of the scheme, there will be a substantial increase in volume of WEEE to be processed in Hong Kong. We assessed that the Hong Kong market didn't have enough capacity. Therefore, we have this large factory. The tendering process is open and fair and transparent, like all tendering exercises. If the overall processing capacity can cope with 50,000 or tons, the expected processing capacity of Alba is about 30,000 tons at the highest level. So other recyclers can participate in dealing with WEEE. As for spelling out the licensing requirements in black and white, as I said earlier, we can do that. Any follow-up? No. Then the third round, Mr. Xiu. Thank you, Chairman. Now we've heard the story very clearly. Those in the downstream are not included in the consultation. Now you allow them to apply for a license starting from 16th of June. They don't know what they can do. If you ask us by the end of the year to set the deadline, then you just to end the business. I agree with Mr. Ho. You want to regulate them so that there can be a lead, so that there can be a leader to set the standard, to set the pace, so that the industry will not damage our environment. That's okay. But you should allow other businesses to survive. It's a matter of justice. And they cannot meet the time frame. That's a problem. Now, when you commence the law, you need to be fair. When you launch the law, you need to be fair. You should be open. Well, you consulted the upstream businesses. We didn't have any specific comments. You talked to them. But what about the downstream operators? You have to consult them. They don't have legal representatives, and therefore you ignore them. Now suddenly you chop them with a big knife, and they really can not cope with that. Can you give them more time so that they can turn around? Can you give them more time? How can they handle that within half a year? I think the question has been raised repeatedly. The trade can apply for a license starting from 19th of June. When will they have to cease operation if they don't have a license? This is a deadline. I have pointed out this from the legislative process. If you want to pass the law at the end of the year, that's the deadline. If you don't have a license, you cannot operate at that time. It seems that it's not possible in terms of a time frame. You have to go before the panel, and then you have to go to the House committee to set up a bills committee. From the actual legislative process and also the operation of the trade, you may not be able to get the system up and running by the end of the year. But I have to reiterate, that is not the issue which we have to deal with, because the commencement notice before us has nothing to do with the commencement date of the system, the licensing system. The DD has answered this. This is a very serious problem. People will have to close down the business. Well, the DD, let me explain it more clearly. When we vet the license applications, say for example, they do not get the building's approval. We plan to do this. When they're applying for similar related approvals, say for example, they are applying for building safety permits, without affecting the safety of the building, we can issue a provisional license or a short-term license. Can that last for 2 or 3 years? The DD. We have a shorter license. The overriding principle is that the applicant will have to apply for related approval, say, for example, approval of the buildings department. We will be flexible by issuing a short-term license for the applicant. As for the timetable, Chairman, you referred to the end of the year. We have this plan. We hope that after we've handled we've processed the applications, we are able to issue the license, we'll introduce a system. We have to consider the processing of the licenses after the 19th of July. We hope that the trade will make applications so that we understand the current situation. We then can look at the commencement date of the system. If we are to commence or to launch the licensing system, no operation be allowed without the license. That will involve another commencement notice, and the LegCo will have to scrutinize that as well. At that time, you may want to know the application situation, the processing situation, and also the chance of compliance. We'll have better information at that time. But if the commencement cannot be done by the 16th of July, then things will become later. We want become late, and we want to start ASAP. Now, for application for licenses, apart from land matters, there are other issues. Now you have to pay $18,000 for applying for license. As for Elba, they send the goods to Europe. They just get 2 licenses, and that will be okay. But for the downstream companies, they may have dozens of companies receiving their products. Say if they have 30 outlets, then they will have to pay $500,000. The DD, what sort of licenses are required? Do you require special licenses within the chain? First, the processing facility will have a license, processing license. When they import or export, they have to get an import and export permit. As for licensing, a lot of discussion has transpired. It's about dismantling, about recycling. If they are to get a license, it's similar to our present system. There is a designated fee. Mr. Shiu is concerned about import and export. Do you need to apply per event? Now, in the import and export system, there is certain arrangement. Maybe my colleague can explain. Mr. Tam. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shiu, for the question. As for the import-export permit, a license can cover many counts of import and export. In making the approval, we will approve on the quantity. And as long as it is within this quantity, whether it's 5 shipments or 10 shipments, 5 shipments or 10 shipments, then it will be covered in the $18,000 permit. Say for Elba, it has a monopoly. It pays $18,000 to get a permit. But for those in the trade, they may send their goods to 10 or 20 places. They will have to get 10 or 20 permits. Are you doing the same as you have been doing? Well, at present, there is a license for dangerous waste. Say if a facility is to deal with dangerous chemical waste, then they have to get a license. The import and export will also require a permit. The computers are not dangerous waste. You turn the 5 classes of REE into chemical waste, but today they are not. Yes, I think the question is understood. The DD. We do not designate REE as chemical waste. Under the PRS rather, we have to make sure that Hong Kong can process the 5 classes of REE. And we make reference to the practice of handling dangerous waste. We do not designate REE as chemical waste. Mr. Chen, I want a 4th round. Well, after the 3rd round, the public hearing will come to an end so that the deputations can leave. Mr. Chen. When I asked the administration, I asked whether the administration has assessed the impact on the trade, how many businesses will be affected. The administration said that they would wait for the applications. I think that's outrageous. When the government had proposed a policy, it should. When a government has a policy, it should have assessed how many people will be affected before you implement the policy. I think now you're putting the cart before the horse. I want to give this opportunity to the deputations. They don't know the licensing conditions. Just now, the DD, Mr. Wong, has listed the requirements. I give them the chance to make a simple reply. I don't know who can articulate their position. Now, can they fulfill the licensing requirements listed by Mr. Wong? I believe Alba can fulfill that. So who can comply with that? Who is going to speak? Ms. Kwok. I want to address the question asked by Mr. Chen. First, we don't know how to get the license. We asked for 3 to 5 years because we sincerely want to continue our business. We want to know how can we get the license they require. Say, for example, buildings approval or approval by the departments. We want to comply with the instruction of the officials. And therefore, we ask for 3 to 5 years so that we can meet your requirements and we can continue our business. We are in the environmental business. This is our business. If you ask us to close down, what are we going to do next? You want to assess the situation. Now, you said at the previous meeting, you said that you received 10 applications or indications at least. Among the 10 indications, how many can be successful? In those indications, among those indications, some of those who have expressed an interest are members. As for insurance, the insurance is $75,000, 20 companies. And so if every permit requires the insurance, then if it's 10, then it will be $750,000 with many buyers and many sellers. You have to be fair. How can you be fair? We need to be on a level playing field. Ms. Kwok, you have answered the question. This is not the time for the deputations to. It is my time, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chu, concerning the handling of chemical waste, they have a registration, and the registration doesn't require the industrial land to be and the EPD charge several $100s. Why can't that processing license be issued under the same conditions? If the processing conditions are not in line with the law, if we are not in line with the law, then this kind of processing chemical waste permit is also against the law. They don't need to be on industrial land. So the EPD owes us an explanation. It's time for Mr. Chen to ask question. He wants his question to be answered by I want the officials to respond to the deputations. Who would like to respond? Among the deputations who would like to respond to Mr. Chen's question. You have to give me time. Yes, I'm very flexible in handling the time. You can see that you don't need to worry about time. The DD. Yes, Mr. Chen. The DD refer to toilets. I'm not sure about it. We all have toilets. In my factory, it's about premises, not toilet. Now we want to close down. We suffer from severe pressure, but we have signed contracts. Now we pay $700,000 per month for rent for several years. We cannot get away with it, and really don't know how we can die. And that's the very important issue. Mr. Chu referred to the $200 of registration fee. So at certain premises dealing with dangerous waste, it has to register. It is different from a licensing system. In the future, or rather at present, with regard to handling of dangerous waste, there is a license. It's different from the registration he referred to. Whether Alba will certainly get a license and other existing operators will not get a license. We've also said that there were 10 indications of interest. Can they fulfill the requirements? We are dealing with that. Now we have preliminary information, and we may ask for further information from the applicants. With regard to the 10 indications, it is not appropriate to say how many will be able to get the license. You are concerned about land use conditions. We have seen that those who have indicated their interest, not everyone will fail in terms of land use, said the Speaker. And so assessing the situation of the trade, the PRS involves many elements, whether it's upstream or downstream. As for downstream, the recycling yards and the compliance of the operators, I cannot definitely say whether they will or they will not get a license without further information. That's why we need to start the application process ASAP, and only then will we be able to obtain adequate information on whether the applicants are able to get a license.
發言嘅就
Any members want to speak in the third round? If not, then... Well, let me thank the deputations for coming today. And your views are very valuable. We'll ask the administration to continue to communicate with the trade. And you can see that there are a lot of operational issues, particularly for those operating in the new territories. All the questions raised just then, some of them are not covered by the current regulation, but they have to do with operations at a later stage or future regulations. So we very much really value your input. So thank you all for coming. You may be excused now. But we'll continue our meeting right here. Members are still here. We have been trying very hard to try to handle the matter well. We'll continue the meeting of this subcommittee. We're supposed to adjourn at 12:45. So deputations, please excuse yourselves.
咁啊，而家咧小休。
Let's have a small break now of 5 minutes.